This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview. Joining us today is Ben Turney, the CEO of Kavango Resources, for a special feature on the KCB. That's, of course, the Kalahari copper belt in Botswana. And this is a project that investors would be quite familiar with. I think a lot of people quite excited to see activity start on the ground over there in the KCB. So we're going to be talking about the drill strategy that Kavango have implemented, the work that's been done to date, and the plans in general, and a bit of an outlook for copper as well. So Ben, I'll hand over to you. You've got your slides there. You can start taking us through them, and I will jump in with any questions as and when.
Thanks, Mark. And yeah, please do, because we're obviously going to be covering quite a lot of ground today. So we've obviously got to just leave this disclaimer up, as we always do, and just give people a quick opportunity to read it. But yeah, any questions, just fire away, because there is certainly a lot for us to talk about on this project. So I'll start with an overview of the opportunity as we see it. Kavango currently has 12 prospecting licenses in the Kalahari copper belt, over 5,000 square kilometres. This is a huge area of land. If you think about Norfolk and Suffolk together and what that landmass is in the UK, that's roughly the area of ground that we're covering in the KCB. So it really is a very large land package. I'll talk a bit more in a moment about how we assembled this and put it together. But we believe we've got highly prospective, underexplored ground that has the potential to host one or more major metal deposits. And of course, with the metal prices as they are now, with copper in particular, this is a really, really exciting project for us, which is why over the last 18 months, we've dedicated as much of our operational resource to this project area as we have. So 80% of our resources on the ground have been deployed in the copper belt. And of course, we've now just yesterday started our maiden drill campaign up at PL082. So in terms of where we currently sit, the Kalahari copper belt is one of the world's leading provinces for copper exploration. It's really only been over about the last 10 years that there's been a big move in the copper belt, both with Khoemacau, the sort of privately held company that's further to the northeast, and of course the Mod Resources and Metal Tiger discoveries from 2015, which of course were taken over by Sandfire Resources and currently are leading to the development of the Matheo mine, which is due to come on stream in March next year. Now, in terms of where Kavango currently sits today, we've been very painstaking in our efforts in exploring the KCB, because we knew that with this project, unlike our other two project areas down at the KSZ and at Dittel, which are much more conceptual in nature, the exploration model in the KCB is really tried and tested. So we're not having to invent anything here. We are being innovative. We've deployed new types of technology, and of course we've used certain methods that are in-house to give us what we feel will be an exploration edge. But for the most part, the exploration model is well known, the deposit model is well known. So really, when we put that drill bit in the ground, which, as I said, we just started yesterday, we are out to make discoveries here. So in terms of the work that we've done, we've completed a competent persons report in May this year. We've had 10 of our licenses independently valued, which has put an $8.6 million valuation on the vehicle that contains those 10 licenses. This is the project that currently we hold with Power Metal Resources, and we're in the process of buying Power Metal out of their stake so that we'll take 100% control. But more than that, we've invested very heavily in Botswana. So one of the key distinguishing features about Kavango is that our workforce, our entire workforce, is local. We don't employ any expats locally. Our exploration manager is local. Our managing director is local. Everyone managing the finance function, our senior geologists, right throughout the team down to the casual labourers we employ. Everybody is local in Cav. Now, that's been particularly useful for us, Mark, over the last couple of years, because with the pandemic, which has restricted some of our competitors in the region because they were following a much more sort of remote model where they were flying people in previously to do much of the work. That meant they were limited in terms of how much work they could do. Whereas for Kavango, we've continued really at full steam ahead, despite obviously the restrictions placed on everybody as a result of COVID. So in terms of where we now sit, we've just recently announced a 37,600 meter drill strategy, which I'll go through in more detail with you in a moment, which is focused on 4 of our prospecting licenses. Now, this work has really been the pinnacle, the result of all of this work that we've been doing on the ground since about March last year. And we're very, very excited now that we've entered into the drilling phase. And what I now believe is a numbers game. If the copper deposits exist on our ground, then we believe we've got a very strong chance of finding them.
Yeah, if I'll just jump in on that, Ben, just quickly. You said the exploration model there is tried and tested. So this is a very different beast to the KSZ project that you have.
Absolutely. So some of the methods that we're using in the KSZ for discovery of these nickel deposits, they are well known globally. So, for example, use of TDEM technology and obviously CSAMT, but they've never been deployed within the KSZ itself. And one of the great challenges down there is that the host environment is so conductive. The big difference up here in the KCB is that the host environment has been explored very successfully, both in Botswana and in Namibia. One of the slides, Mark, I've got to show in a few slides' time is about the deposit model. So we could talk a bit more about that and the success that there's been in Botswana to date. And I can sort of talk to you about how that sort of fits in with our model as we move forward.
Yes. Okay. Yes, please do that.
So in terms of course, then the outlook, now, I mean, I realize that obviously equity markets are under a lot of pressure. Share prices, including our own, have come into some, pretty hard times over the course of 2022. But the overall outlook for metals is absolutely fantastic. And the next few slides I'd like to show you just sort of give an indicator of just really sort of quite how important copper is going to be in terms of the investment environment over the next 10 to 20 years.
Okay.
So, of course, as we're all aware, Mark, the green revolution is upon us. There is this huge move globally towards electrification, moving away from the combustion engine, finding new sources of power to power our economies. And one of the fundamental supply drivers within this will be copper. A huge amount of copper is going to be needed for both creating vehicles and putting in place the infrastructure to support the fueling of those vehicles. But, of course, all the other industrial needs that there are going to be as we move into what we hope will be a greener way of powering our economies. Now, this chart here was one that we came across. It was from McKinsey in 2021. And what's really interesting about it is if you look at the second line from the top, you can see just really quite how prevalent copper is in pretty much all areas of the economy. It's really only outmatched by steel. Steel, of course, is used for building the actual infrastructure, the actual physical infrastructure itself, and steel is used across the board. Copper itself is used pretty much in all instances to enable the powering and sort of the electrification of this infrastructure. So it's an incredibly important metal. But over the last 12 years, since about 2010, when the bear market really started to kick in, there's been a huge amount of underinvestment in exploration in this space. A big supply surplus did build up prior to that. And what companies had been doing over the last 10 years was really the producers had really been focusing on running down their supply, but they hadn't been thinking about what would happen longer term in the supply chain. Now, alongside that, there's been another major fundamental driver in this space, which I believe we're now starting to see the impact of, and that's been the influence of Chinese money. So what the Chinese have done, and I think the Chinese have been very, very smart about this in terms of their long-term strategic view, is they focused very much on buying development assets across the world. So Chinese money has poured into buying known deposits that could be turned into mines. This has all happened right under everybody else's nose, and no one's really responded to this until too late. But the Chinese, to all intents and purposes, have locked up a lot of the world's global supply of copper. Now, that in itself is likely to have, an impact on sort of the structure of this market as we move into this period where we're expecting such higher demand. Now, for companies like ours, what we think is that we are now on the cusp of perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime boom. All of the fundamental drivers are pointing in the same direction. And that's what this next slide really illustrates for us. And that is, over the next 20 years, more copper is expected to be needed in the global economy than has been mined throughout human history. I mean, if we just sit back and just think about that for a moment, this is at a time when the production capacity is relatively low. Development projects, those that have been brought through or being brought through to production, are typically in the hands of one nation. This tells us there are massive structural imbalances within this market. So the overall outlook for copper itself is phenomenally bullish. And for Kavango, our hope is that we are located in what is one of the world's leading provinces for copper exploration, in one of the world's most mining-friendly jurisdictions that there is. Botswana's been independent since the mid-1960s. It's had stable transfer of power ever since. It's an extremely well-run, well-organized country. It's got fantastic infrastructure, both in terms of the road and the rail networks, in terms of the power supply, in terms of the local skills as well. So the local workforce is well educated. It's also a country that has a lot of equality as well. So within our team, we have a number of women working for us. One of our senior project geologists is female as well. So it really is a very progressive, forward-thinking country, and the copper belt itself is relatively underexplored, which I'll talk you through a bit about in a moment.
And it's underexplored presumably because of this decades-long general underexploration in general, really across the board, which is going to start to really, well, we're going to start to notice it pretty rapidly, I think.
Well, we're already noticing it, Mark, because look at the price of copper. And although the price of copper has pulled back over the last few months, where it seems to be stabilizing is what were previously former highs in the price. So I think that move has already started. And again, it's right in front of our eyes. But one of the things about Botswana that's unique to Botswana, you're absolutely right in terms of the overall sort of macro underinvestment that there's been. But in Botswana, we also have the presence of these Kalahari sands. So 70% of Botswana is covered by sand, which of course obscures much of the regional geology. That's led to Botswana being very underexplored as a country, despite it's sitting on the western edge of the Cap Vale Craton. Now, these cratonic edges are absolutely huge. They're these great tectonic plates that obviously move around over hundreds of millions of years. And where they split and come back together again, this is where huge amounts of magma have passed through these systems and obviously brought from the Earth's core the metallic elements and the metallic deposits that we're looking for. What Botswana also has is a huge amount of coal. Now, coal is really important because what coal introduces into this, huge melting pot is a source of sulfur, and that sulfur provides the active ingredient for the segregation of metallic elements to form these metal deposits that we're looking for today. So Botswana is a country of enormous prospectivity that very specifically has been underexplored because the Kalahari sands have been impenetrable until relatively recently with the introduction of new geophysical surveying techniques. Now, as anybody who's followed the Kavango story will know, one of our key specialisms is the deployment of geophysics. So we're a very technology-focused, technology-driven, data-driven company, which sets us apart from nearly all of our peers, certainly on the London Stock Exchange, who tend to rely on more traditional exploration methods.
Okay. Well, I wonder, what about you talk about that using modern techniques. Of course, we hear it a lot, don't we, that places that have had lots of historic exploration that are thought to be exhausted now, but actually there's a lot more there using some of the modern exploration techniques to actually see a bit more under the surface than we could a long time ago. So, I mean, what sort of exploration history has been on the KCB in general?
Well, that's a really good question because it brings us to the next slide. So in the KCB in general, we've seen discoveries out to the west in Namibia on the western edges and to the northeast within Botswana. This map that we can see on our screen now, this really sort of highlights the point. And as you can see, to the northeast of the belt, around the town of Maun in Botswana, that's where most of the exploration effort within the KCB has been focused. The reason for that is that the sand cover in this area is either non-existent or relatively light, which means that there's been more geology at surface, which of course are sort of previous exploration companies. It's why they focused on these areas, because it's basically been the lowest hanging fruit. The further west that you go into the belt, the deeper the sand cover becomes, but it's not so deep that it precludes the traditional exploration techniques. Now, this is really where Kavango's opportunity lies. Now, if you notice on this map, in the northeast, you can see that the copper belt is split up. There's this real balkanization effect where you have lots of much smaller, very oddly shaped licenses. The reason for that is that when you take on an exploration license or a prospecting license in Botswana, you have a 7-year term that's split into 3 segments. It's split into the first 3 years, followed by 2 segments of 2 years after that. Now, at the end of each exploration period, at the end of the first period, you have to relinquish 50% of your license area. That's within the law. After that, at the end of each period, The Ministry of Mines might require, sorry, the Department of Mines, I should say, might require that you give up more ground if you've not met your spending commitments. So what's tended to happen is there have been quite a lot of local companies who've picked up sort of the 50% relinquishments. But then because they've not had the same access to capital markets that we as Kavango are very fortunate to have, they've been fairly cash starved, particularly during the bear market years. So this is why you see all of these very odd shaped, very small licenses up in the northeast. The further west that you go, because the sand cover is deeper and there was a prevailing consensus that this made the ground less prospective, this is why Kavango has been able to pick up the size of licenses that we have. But what we now believe, or what we originally believed, our original exploration hypothesis, was that this ground actually was still extremely prospective, and we'd be able to use geophysics and our skills in the application of geophysics to identify drill targets. Now, as it's turned out, the story has been much better than that for us, because once our team started to work on the ground, we've actually found there's been much more outcropping and much thinner sands than had previously been expected. And again, that puts us in an extremely strong position, because what we've identified with our exploration program over the last 18 months are really some very, very high priority target areas. And within those, these 188 drill targets that we've just recently announced with our drill strategy.
And did you pick up that license area then specifically in that area, or was it sort of more what was available at the time?
So the licenses that we picked up just to the south of the town of Hornsey, the ones I'm highlighting on the screen now, right in the middle, we picked those up because they became available. Each month, the Ministry of Mines publishes the prospecting licenses map. And I've got to say, to Mike Moles' credit and former exploration manager Eddie, the two of them saw that this license area had become available, and they very quickly put in an application to pick this ground up. So we were very fortunate in that respect that they both saw that opportunity and acted as quickly as they did. And I think, that really could prove to be very valuable for the company in the long term. Out to the west, these Mamuno licenses are much more interesting. They've been picked up by a local private company, and we bought those licenses in mid-2021. So we actually acquired them from them in a cash transaction where we paid $200,000 to take on this license area. Now, what's really exciting about this ground is that it borders to the west the 10,000 square kilometers that Rio Tinto has picked up in Namibia, and immediately to the north, the ground that Sandfire has picked up, which is an extension of their license areas out into Botswana. So the Mamuno licenses in particular, we're very excited about. We've got some excellent results that we've already had, and there are more results pending. And I've got a slide to describe those in a bit more detail a little later on.
But you are effectively surrounded by lots of different license owner people. The whole area is staked.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's a really good point, Mark. And again, this is one of the key things about the opportunity with Kavango, is that for anybody to break into this space now, that ship has sailed. So the chances of just picking up new licenses by application is practically zero. I mean, what you can see on this map is that each of these areas, each of these boundaries represents licenses that have been picked up. So Kavango, with its 5,000 square kilometers of highly prospective ground, if we are able to start making discoveries, then the path to commercialization for us is really clear. And this is another major strength of Botswana. It's not only the geological success that there's been within the copper belt, but it's also been the transaction success that there's been. In particular, the one that British investors will know most about, of course, was Sandfire's acquisition of Mod Resources. So the Metal Tiger shareholders and Metal Tiger itself did extremely well out of that. But this reflects that just not only how mining friendly Botswana is, but also what a commercially friendly jurisdiction it is as well. So the rule of law there is absolutely solid. The commercial contracts are consistently defended in court if anything ever is contested. It really is. It's a great country to do business in. And in the event that we have geological success, Kavango offers a great opportunity for a company that might want to come and sort of join the copper exploration revolution in Botswana. We offer them a perfect footprint to do that.
And are you at risk of the same 50% license relinquishment, though? Is that a concern?
It's not a concern, but it does mean that we have to move quickly. So we've recently made some applications within some of our license areas where we have had to give up some ground within 50% relinquishment, but the rules. But what you do in those circumstances is that at the end of that first 3-year period, you obviously give up the ground that's the least prospective. Now, this is another reason that we've not rushed to drill over the last 18 months, because we needed to take that first pass over these new licenses that both we applied for and that we picked up through acquisition, just to make sure that any ground that we gave up, we didn't sort of inadvertently give away, what could end up being the company's crown jewels. So this work that we've had to do, I realized that, it has been fairly painful for some shareholders, and that there's been a bit of disquiet over how long some of this has taken. But it's not only a case that we wanted to be really thorough in terms of picking our drill targets, it was also to make sure that at the end of the relinquishment period, we didn't give up any prospecting or prospective ground that could end up, having potential for discoveries to be made on this.
Okay.
So in terms of the belt itself, this next map, this again just illustrates the point I was making, and the incredible opportunity that there is. So we can see the concentration of mines. So the two main mines in Botswana, and there are 3 mines over in Namibia, on the western edge in Namibia and out to the northeast. This land in the middle, this ground in the middle, we believe it's extremely highly prospective, and that's also reflected in particular by the fact that immediately to our west we have Rio Tinto covering this ground that I'm highlighting, and Sandfire to our north. So we really are sort of swimming in a pool that's inhabited by the big boys. This is a serious Premier League postcode that we've picked up. And again, this is why we've had to do the work that we've had, because once that drill bit starts to hit the ground, we are out to make major discoveries. And if we can have any success, we know that within the region that we're in, that this will be of interest. And with the demand drivers that there are going to be for copper in the future, we're absolutely delighted to be part of this incredibly exciting copper exploration frontier.
Excellent. Can I ask you why you didn't perhaps focus on this area earlier? We've gone to KSZ, we've gone to Ditau. Is there a reason why the KCB was left until sort of last?
Well, it hasn't, but this is the whole point, Mark. It hasn't been left till last. We put 80% of our teams have been working on the ground in these licensed areas. And, we've got 5,000 square kilometers to cover. It's a huge amount of ground. There was a lot of preparatory work we had to do before we drilled. Had we just simply rushed into drilling, it would have been sort of much more of a guessing game, a chance. But what we had to do here is we had to get out there. We had to get boots on the ground. We had to do the geological mapping. That meant walking literally thousands of kilometers across our team to look for outcrop, look for any geological indicators and clues. We then did the 10,000 soil samples. Now, those soil samples are at 50 meter spacing. So that's obviously 500,000 meters, which means we've walked 500 kilometers of sample lines for the soil sampling. It really has been a huge effort, Mark. So it's not a case that we left the KCB to last, sort of through a choice of drilling. The KSZ and the Ditau, those were drill ready targets because they're more proof of concept. We needed to get the diamond cores up to be able to test those so they could tell us about the subsurface geology. In this case, we were looking for targets for mineralization, which meant that our guys on the ground just simply had to walk, to put in a lot of kilometers to cover the ground properly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's an awful lot.
It really is. And this is why it has taken so long. So moving on to the next slide and talking about the deposit model. So this table here, and I think it'd be a good idea, Mark, if we shared this presentation online via your Twitter account once we publish this video. Mm-hmm. This table here, this shows in Botswana the main deposits that have been found and the style of and their main characteristics. Now, one of the great things about the KCB is that we're talking about a sedimentary hosted copper environment. So what that basically means is that the copper forms effectively in layers within the stratigraphy, within the rock layers. Now, this is very different to the porphyry systems that you see in Southern America in particular. The South American porphyries tend to be much lower grade. They tend to be much bigger, of course, but they're a lot harder to mine. In Botswana, the sedimentary hosted copper deposits tend to be much higher grade, so 1% or greater, and also quite shallower to surface, which means they're open pittable. Now, this is really sort of at the heart of the commercial opportunity here, because of course, open pit operations are not only easier and therefore cheaper to mine, they're also much easier to bring into production, because you basically obviously start digging from surface until you hit the copper mineralization and then ship the ore off to a processing plant to be processed to extract copper. Now, again, if we think about what's coming over the next 20 years in terms of demand for copper that there's going to be, this style of copper is in particular is going to be very important because it's also much easier on the energy usage as well. So it's a much more efficient style of mining that can be conducted to extract, obviously, copper from these deposits. So the KCB really just ticks so many boxes in terms of not only its exploration potential, but then the commercial potential after that. And when the world really starts gasping for copper, which I believe is coming within the next 5 years, that's why the Botswana really could find itself as one of the world's leading jurisdictions for supply.
Excellent. Are there any other open pit operations ongoing in Botswana at the moment? Do you know?
Well, they all are, is the simple answer. Well, so actually, no, that's not true. The Khoemacau mine isn't. But the main one, of course, is the T3 discovery. So Sandfire at the moment is bringing that into discovery, into production.
Yeah.
That's the Matheo mine. That alone is going to look at producing 5,000 million tons. I think it's 5.6 million tons of ore a year. So they put nearly $400 million into the copper producing plant there, the equipment that they've created. This massive mining site, and that's for the T3 discovery that, of course, Mod Resources and Metal Tiger discovered back in 2014, 2015.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A lot of people will be familiar with that story.
But again, just to answer your question, I mean, it's tried and tested. You know, there's this open pit operation. The fact that Sandfire have invested as much as they have into this mining facility, I think T3 itself has got about a 12-year life of mine expectation. You don't put $400 million into a mining production facility that has the potential to be expanded as well if you're only looking at 12 years worth of production. Of course, Sandfire has a lot of other exploration ground itself. We've got one of our very close contacts is now working for Sandfire in as one of their senior project geologists, our former exploration manager, John Lauderdale. So he's obviously helping head up a massive exploration program that they're running. So again, it just highlights and emphasizes just how hot a territory this is and what the enormous potential there is for not only discovery, but then commercialization of those discoveries.
Indeed. Excellent. Okay. So how are Kavango going to make that discovery?
Well, that's an excellent question. And of course, that now brings us to the next slide, Mark, which of course is license 082. Now, 082 is one of our licenses that's held within the LVR joint venture that we have with a locally based company. Kavango now owns 90% of the LVR JV after we accelerated that deal at the start of September. We announced it last year that we were planning to accelerate that deal. We completed it in September this year because that then gave us really full operational control over this license area. Now, what we're looking at here is a map, an illustrative map of 082, which highlights some of our main target areas where our work on soil geochemistry has come up with some of the top results. Basically, anything greater than 30 parts per million is a high priority target. And as you can see on the map on your screens now, we've got quite a few of these really quite significant hits throughout 082. Now, we've currently started drilling here. We're doing our first 6-hole campaign. It's an RC program that we've just started drilling. And the first target that we're testing is the central zone. Now, the central zone is 27 kilometers long, as you can see on this map. There's potential for multiple discoveries down this zone. One of the great things about 082 is when I was out in Botswana, I'd always looked at 082 as a bit of an afterthought, to be honest. And if you look at our presentations in the past, 082 was always at the very end of every presentation I gave. I think I'd looked at it and it just always felt like it was a very small area. But of course, that very small area was in comparison to all the rest of the ground that we have. And we've, of course, got over 14,000 square kilometers across our entire portfolio. So in comparison to that, 082 always looked really small. When I actually visited 082 and got, my boots on the ground there in August, I couldn't believe how big it was. And just the idea of this 27-kilometer long target area that we have, this central zone, it's absolutely enormous, Mark. If you think about that, that's getting on for about 16, 17 miles. And along that, as you can see on this map here, we have a number of elevated copper readings, each of which represents a high priority target area for us. Now, what's really interesting about the central zone in particular is it appears to coincide with a structural corridor that runs this Basito anticline hinge that runs right through and appears to be the controlling mechanism, or the controlling geological feature for two deposits to the northeast, the Plutus deposit and the Zeta deposit. Now, both of these are owned by Khoemacau. They are open pit potential operations. They're not being mined at the moment, but from what I understand, the plan is to bring those into production in the not too distant future. Khoemacau's really been focused on their Khoemacau mine up to this point. But in terms of where 082 actually sits, the regional interpretation of the underlying geology, we appear to be right in the hotspot of a major controlling mechanism for this style of mineralization that we're looking for. So these copper silver deposits.
And these lines we're seeing, then that's not a fault line, is it? Or
yeah, I mean, essentially, we believe it's what's called this sort of anticline hinge trace. So, in other words, that's sort of the controlling mechanism for the formation of these dome-like formations that you see within the region, that are the controlling mechanism for.
I see. So the domes sort of go between points A and point B.
So if you imagine that when the layers were created, so there used to be ancient seas over this region, which has led to the formation of these redox boundaries. What a redox boundary is essentially it was a layer of organic material that, when sort of things like, you know, the sort of whatever lives in the ocean died, and it's the dead material, the dead matter, sunk to the bottom of the ocean. It created this impermeable layer, which obviously oxygen couldn't get through. Now, over time, obviously that hardened, but this redox boundary effectively meant that when mineralization passed through this area through hydrothermal activity, it would get trapped at these redox boundaries and it would stay where it was, because obviously oxygen couldn't permeate through this impermeable layer, which meant obviously essentially the copper didn't rust, it didn't disappear. Then, over millions of years, what happened, if you imagine sort of relatively flat-lying seabeds, over time, the seas disappeared, as you know, for various reasons, but the land itself, the ground itself, would have been subject to these massive pressures, creating these sort of wave-like features, these domes, as essentially the land was pushed into it. I started off this presentation talking about Botswana's geological setting, these cratonic edges. So if you imagine the tectonic plates that float on the world's surface, obviously over hundreds of millions of years, these processes exert enormous pressure on the landmass that's immediately adjacent to these and creates the dome formations. And it's the dome, this illustration that we see here, is these dome formations that control mineralization right throughout the Kalahari copper belt, because what's been found is that you find mineralization typically on either side of the domes or at the very top. This is a very, very distinct mineralization style to this region. And this also goes back to what I was talking about earlier on when I said that, you know, this is very much a tried and tested deposit model and a tried and tested exploration model for finding these deposits.
Okay. And can you illustrate where you're actually drilling then, or not quite exactly yet?
So in terms of the first target, as we've announced yesterday, we're now drilling in this area here on the central zone. Okay. So we have a 100-meter wide anomaly that's got 3 greater than 30 parts per million copper readings from the soils. This also sits on top of what we think is an anticline. So that's basically one of these sides that you see in the dome. So we've got 2 objectives, obviously, with this first drill that we're doing. First of all, we're looking for mineralization. That goes without saying. But what we're also looking to do is to prove that this anticline exists, that our interpretation of the geophysics data that we have is correct, and that we have this redox boundary contact. If we're able to point that mark, it's phenomenal news for this license, because if the redox boundary exists down this 27-kilometer strike, it opens up this entire strike length as a major drill target for us to go out and test. And the fact that we've got these really quite strong copper readings at surface, if it turns out that that copper is related to mineralization that's trapped underneath this redox boundary within these dome-like structures, then the prospectivity of this license is absolutely enormous. Now, what's also quite interesting is we have, from our geophysics interpretation, and we've talked about this in our announcements quite a lot, this analog with the banana zone deposit that sits immediately to the southeast. Now, the yellow lines that you can see here represent Hansi Ridge. So this is a major ridge that passes throughout the region from the northeast down to the southwest. And on the other side of Hansi Ridge is the banana zone, which is one of Comacau's major discoveries. And within that banana zone, they've made 5 discoveries. So again, it highlights the potential within our area. Where I've talked, there really is within 082 alone the potential for multiple discoveries. Now, what you can see here is on the right-hand side, we have a screenshot that's on Comacau's website where they've published some of their geophysics, then the interpretation of the banana zone itself. Obviously, on the left-hand side, this is our data from AEM that we flew. They look fairly different because we've used different analytical software to do our interpretation. But what you can see is this shape that appears very, very similar to what you see in the banana zone, where you have this layer of very conductive material to the southeast, and to the northwest, much less conductive material. So this really does look like a mirror image of the deposit style. Where our licenses, where we think the opportunity in our licenses is that where to the south, the banana zone has been, or banana dome, I should say, has been closer to surface. So it's meant it's been weathered over time, and there's outcropping of this dome, which is what led to the original discovery. What we believe is the dome underneath 082 is actually buried underneath about 5 meters of sand at the thinnest area. So that sand cover limited historic exploration, which has obviously opened up the opportunity for Kavango today.
Okay, good. I was going to ask you about geophysics or aeromag, and that's very clear then. It's overlaid there exactly where the arrows are and where you're targeting. Just the central dome then, is that prospective as well? But you don't actually own that area, do you? Or?
Well, the central ridge. No, we don't. So going back to the metals, the metals map I showed earlier, this ground is all taken. We're surrounded by a combination of, there's some Comacau ground, there's some Sandfire ground. I believe that Cobre, which has obviously recently made a major discovery themselves, the Australian company, they're immediately to the west of 082. Now, we've had some interesting work that's been done for us by a consultant who's done work for Cobre as well, and he's given us some really useful insights which have helped us refine our drill targets on 082. There are also a number of other private companies, local private companies that own around in the immediate area. So it's really part of that sort of balkanized patchwork of licenses that I described earlier on, where you have these very odd shaped licenses.
Okay, so you've got 6 drills that are going to be sunk. One is currently turning.
Yep.
What can you tell us about perhaps how long that might take, and what really you're hoping to find, what you're hoping to see in the drill when it comes up?
So we expect the entire campaign will take about a month. So we're expecting to be done by early November. Obviously, we'll be doing testing with PXRF. We need to see what that tells us in the first instance. We're undecided, whether or not we'll announce anything of that. We'll have to see. And then, of course, it'll be a case of then taking all of the samples and shipping those off for assay testing. So I'm hoping that we'll have final results this side of Christmas. We'll certainly be putting pressure on the lab. The lab owes us a bit of a favour after a bit of an error with some of the detail results. It took them a longer time to produce them. So hopefully we'll be able to bump ourselves up the queue. But we are looking to get on with this quickly. Now, the rig itself is then scheduled to go to another license area. A private company has recently made a discovery adjacent to one of our licenses in the southwest. So the rig is heading back down there to do some follow-up work. Our plan then is to bring it straight back up to our license areas. We haven't decided yet where we will bring the rig back to. Obviously, if we find something particularly interesting we want to follow up in 082, I imagine that would be a priority. But we're also looking very, very closely at the Mamuno licenses, which brings me on to the next slide. And these, of course, are the licenses that are adjacent to the Namibian border. Now, the Mamuno ground was basically being completely overlooked historically. The company that was able to pick these licenses up just applied for them back in 2020 and got them granted. Now, one of the things that we found out from our desktop research is that extensive airborne mag surveys were flown over Botswana in the 1970s by a Canadian aid program. They didn't quite miss this area, but they didn't fly as tightly spaced lines over this particular ground as they did in other areas of Botswana. That led to a fairly distorted view of the regional data that there is. It looked like this ground wasn't that prospective, which is why we believe it's been missed. But of course, immediately over the border to the west, we've got Rio Tinto, who've got 10,000 square kilometres, and immediately to the north of these licenses, you have Sandfire with an extension of their licence area that obviously comes in from Botswana. So for Kavango, this has actually proved to be, I think, a fantastic deal for us that we secured last year. Now, the project itself, when our guys actually got on the ground, I talked earlier about sort of how many kilometres our teams have had to walk in the geological mapping. We were really surprised to see relatively a lot of outcropping at surface. This just wasn't meant to be there. The consensus was that this ground was completely covered by Kalahari sand. Well, our guys found that actually, no, that wasn't the case. We've since followed up with soil samples. And one of the things to note about the soil sampling, I'm not sure if viewers can see this on the screen, but the hits that we've had, these purple lines, although we've not had the same peak values as we have up at license 082, you can see there's an accumulation of soil in soil copper anomalies of between 30 to 65 parts per million. These really are very high readings, Mark, and we've got they're concentrated over what is known to be or interpreted to be a regional fault line, again, that's running through that should be prospective for this style of mineralization. Now, we've been very fortunate in this license. When I was out in Botswana, we found out about an airborne survey that was being flown over some licenses very close to us. We were able to piggyback off that, and we got some very, very cheap and very quick airborne flown for us in September. We've just received the results of those. Those will be coming out, we hope, in the next week or so. They're going through interpretation. But if the analysis of those results reveals conductor targets, which line up with what's already known about the regional geology, which lines up with our geological mapping, which lines up with our soil sampling, then this area is extremely high priority for us, and we can't wait to get the drill rig here, obviously, to try and make a discovery.
Okay, so after the first round of drilling, this will be the next high priority, providing that things are looking that they're lining up.
Absolutely. I mean, we want to start to stick some holes into this ground, because if this contains what we think it contains, it really could be very exciting for us.
Indeed. Okay.
So that then leaves us with license 036, which is our final main priority target area. Now, this was the original focus of the joint venture with Power and Kanyo Resources. This license area is huge, Mark. I mean, actually having visited this just south of the town of Hansi when I was out there in August, I couldn't believe how big it is. We've got some very big targets within this. We've got Acacia, 2.5 kilometers by 3 kilometers, Marula, 3K by 3K, Happy, 9 kilometers by 1 kilometer, and Kudu, which is about 18 kilometers long of non-continuous strike. The results from this have just simply been, eye-watering. And to be honest, we've learned so much about this ground that obviously our teams are, they've got a lot of work still to do to decide exactly on where we are going to put the drill bit to work. In terms of the effort that we put into this, as I said at the start, we've run 10,000 soil samples over these 3 main project areas. We did over half of those soil samples within this license block. Now, it's not quite drill ready at this stage, simply because there is a lot of data for us to work through. We also want to do more infill work in terms of more work on the ground, more soil sampling. And we're currently doing an extensive reinterpretation of the airborne surveys that we flew over this target area in 2021. So we've got a lot of data from SkyTem for us to work through. Jeremy Bredd is currently working on that, but I'm really looking forward to producing or publishing some of the results on this, because I think we've got one or two little surprises up our sleeve, which I don't think people will see coming. And again, when we're able to talk about this in more detail, it's really going to underline just quite how innovative Kavango is as a company. We are very tech focused, very data driven, and we're taking sort of that really sort of quite ambitious approach towards exploration, and we've really thrown a lot of that at this particular license area. So it will be great when we can start talking about that in more detail.
Okay, but these two, the last ones you've just shown here, they will be coming later. When ideally do you think you might be drilling there?
Well, as soon as possible, Mark. I mean, obviously,
Okay.
we're putting one rig into the field. A lot will depend on what happens up at 082, whether or not we go immediately back there. We're very keen to start drilling and the Marula licenses because those are ready to go. I mean, we just
Okay.
got the final interp of the AEM that we've flown there. In terms of this license area, it's so big and these targets are so large.
Mm.
Obviously, the market requirements for this are that, this game, people want immediate success. So what we need to do is we need to maximize our chances of delivering that immediate success, because obviously what we don't want to do is sort of drill holes with results that, maybe geologically would be, a technical success, the dreaded technical success in this space. Really what we want to do is maximize our chances of actually hitting, hopefully, even economic grade mineralization. So again, it's painstaking work, it's very thorough work, but as soon as we can get that rig back onto our properties, we want to keep it running, as long as we possibly can. We've got 37,600 meters lined up. I mean, obviously, we're not going to look to do that all in one go. We'll be doing that in phases. We are still a small company. We need to be mindful of our budgets. We need to be mindful of our internal resource as well. There are only so many hours in the day, and we don't have the largest team at this stage. Of course, as soon as we make a discovery, that will be transformational for us. As soon as we've got metal on our balance sheet, actual metal values, then obviously, we are ready to scale up as a business. And the foundation that we've put in place, we will be able to expand this business very, very quickly because of the quality of people we've recruited, the way that we've trained them, the processes that we've put in place, and of course, the work that John Lauderdale did until he left us for Sandfire, which is obviously that mantle's been taken up by both Brett and by Fred on the ground in Botswana. So, we really are in great shape, and we just need, the drill bit to deliver some success. So the more that we can do to maximize our chances of that, the better that is for the business.
Indeed, yes. And of course, we've spoken about this flexible drill program. So I think what you've just shown today does show how you will be able to move around. You've already got targets ready to go on the next license area. 37,000 meters potentially of drilling here. An awful lot of drilling, really. Is it all? Is it realistic? Is it all sort of costed for and obviously not planned for at the minute? But it's all, it's going to happen if needed.
It's an excellent question, Mark. In terms of the phased approach,
Mm.
for us to make a discovery internally, we think that first 10 to 15,000 meters, that's going to be key. That's
Okay.
where we'll be working through the best targets. One of the things that our guys on the ground have consistently maintained throughout this is that if these copper bodies exist, if they are on our ground, if there are economic deposits to be found, then we will find them. Unlike a lot of exploration companies, which are really limited by the fact they don't have the same infrastructure or team capacity that we have on the ground in Botswana. The reason I highlighted that at the start of this presentation is because of the people we've recruited and our focus on investing in Botswana, that's meant we've been able to deliver a far more extensive exploration campaign and program than a lot of our competitors are able to, because they have to ship people in. And there are two problems with shipping people in. Is first of all, it's a lot more expensive, but secondly, you lose a lot of retained knowledge. Whereas our guys, they're on the ground permanently. They're learning every day. They're learning more and more about sort of the local geology. They're picking up a lot of incredibly valuable insights, which ultimately we believe will be our competitive edge. Because again, when the drill bit comes to start turning, we've really, we've got people who've been working on these licenses for a long period of time. In terms of obviously how it's costed, we've got a number of financing opportunities that are open to us. We've obviously got a warrant bank that we're going to be relying on a lot next year. I'm looking forward to that. And we also have the Kanye Resources vehicle that we are going to look to float on the Botswana Stock Exchange. When I was down in Botswana in August, I gave a roadshow to institutional investors down there. And it's fair to say there is a lot of interest in backing Kanye. Now, that's really interesting for us, because obviously what that will mean is that Kanye would become, in the event we're able to be successful with this, Kanye would become an asset on our balance sheet and would also essentially become self-financed without needing to go back to the market in the UK. So yes, it is a very ambitious drill strategy for a company of our size, but we've designed this strategy with a view to the Kanye float, which I'm hoping, we'll be able to do some more work on once we've completed the transaction with Power Metals.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that. Have you got anything else to show, Ben, or?
No, that's it, Mark. That's the end. Just the contact details at the end for you.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Thank you very much. That's nearly an hour we've been talking. There were 50 minutes in total. So lots of detail there, Ben, but I think that is needed. It does go to show that a lot of work has, I think, been going on in the background on the KCB. And we're now going to start to see, hopefully, we are going to see the fruits of that work with action on the ground.
Absolutely. Well, look, I mean, as I said at the start, Mark, it's now a numbers game. We've done almost as much as we possibly could, not only to de-risk these targets, but to maximize our chances of success. If the metals are where our data at the moment suggests that they are, then it's a case of us just sticking holes into the ground and looking to discover them. We've got the right drill partner. We've got every confidence in Mindea. We've got a great working relationship with them and with Equity Drilling, their original founders. We have everything in place now to go out and make discoveries. So it's just a case of drill, drill, drill.
Drill, drill, drill. Okay, well, I'm sure you'll be keeping the market updated as you get through those drill holes. Thank you very much, Ben Turney, CEO of Kavango Resources.
Thanks very much, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.